So they're forced effectively to join the Muslim Brotherhood.
You're either part of it, the Brotherhood as it were, or it's backs to the wall.
Islamic organisations forcibly convert people in our prisons.
Are they actually just being radicalised?
How do you de-radicalise someone? You know, she ended up dead. So her dad has killed his daughter. He's protected. He's a Muslim. You're in our gang now. You've got protection.
Tommy Robinson, he had to be in solitary confinement.
I'll tell you what I think about Tommy Robinson, because loads of people have asked me, right?
Unfortunately, in a country that doesn't believe in free speech.
That fella, Axel Rudakubana, Southport killer, he just, people were going, why has he got a kettle?
Right, I will tell you now. He's got a kettle because now it is quite definitely ethnic-based, gang-type culture. Very, very violent.
So you think that's down to the increase in Islamism in the last 10, 20 years?
And it just became more and more violent.
How did that feel to have to work around them?
Now I have no tolerance for people who harm children, none whatsoever. It's just sickening.
61% of regular Heretics viewers haven't subscribed yet. Can I ask you a favour? If you love these fearless conversations, hit subscribe now because it's free, takes 2 seconds, and powers our mission. Tell me, so you are a prison officer, you were a prison officer.
Yes,
Tell
I
me
was.
where and what that involved.
So, prison officer, I started in the private sector, prison in Salford, HMP Forest Bank. Worked there just under 4 years. I didn't enjoy my time there. I didn't know about prisons when I started there. So like any job, what you see is, you adapt to that. I took a year out to work with children. Then I went to work at the infamous Strangeways, or HMP Manchester, as people would like you to call it. I worked there 11 years. That was 10 years on the landings and then 11 months on the sick before I got finished.
11 months on what?
On the sick. I got injured in an incident. Mental health took a big hit, very angry. The prison service doesn't really look after people. In fact, it doesn't at all. I got finished with, it was called anxiety state, which is probably right. I would say there was a lot of anger there. Not depressed, not looking to take my own life or anything like that. I was just angry. I was being treated and a lot of things that I'd seen. So, yeah, that's...
How did you get injured?
How did I get injured? It was a restraint. There was 2 lads with me. I'd just gone on to B wing. There was a lad that I knew from A wing, which is where I've been working 3 weeks. He wasn't happy, kicked off, took him to the floor. I injured my shoulder. We then take him under restraint to the segregation unit. Anyone in prison, if there's an incident, will get taken to a segregation unit. Might not be there a long time, cooling down period. Might return to their own wing or another residential wing. When I got there, some senior managers and that, they're all around this lad, talking to him. I'm stood with my 2 colleagues. One's at his back. He's white. He was an ex-squaddy, good lad. And the other lad, just a couple of weeks earlier, he'd come onto my wing and he looked like he was going to burst in tears. Took him in the office end of the wing, just poured everything out, stressed, taking antidepressants, which I would imagine a lot of prison officers are. He was just in a bad place. I thought he was going to have an heart attack, me. So there's 3 of us there. I've injured my shoulder. One lad's injured his back. My other mate, he's not in a good place. And I'm looking, nobody's paying us attention. Nobody asked how we were. When I first started in that job, there'd be somebody there. There'd be a senior officer, which is in uniform, prison manager, principal officer. Somebody would be there, you're all right, take 5, go and get a Bruce. None of that. Just chatted for like maybe 20 minutes, then returned to my place of work, injured.
It's a bloody hard job. What makes one become a prison officer?
Me? I've been called out in past for saying this, but the reason I joined, I spent like 20 odd years in engineering in Sheffield, you know, born and bred Sheffield lad. Got made redundant quite a few times. Tough gig engineering, dirty, odd, some dangerous jobs, long hour culture. I just wanted, you know, something permanent with maybe a pension at the end of it, something I could work to, looking to retirement. You know, I didn't go in there, like a lot of people say, wanting to make a difference or change people's lives, that sort of thing. Very cliched. I just wanted secure employment and maybe a pension at the end of it.
It was just a job, I suppose. Was it a bit of a baptism of fire when you got in there? Was it a bit harder than you thought?
Yeah, it was. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, right? There's a lot of times I enjoyed it. Sadly, you know, you might have a good week. If there's a bad incident at the end of that week, you only remember the bad incident. But I remember sitting at Forest Bank, that was my first private sector prison, for my interview. So I'm in the car park looking at the walls. I was absolutely, you know, my backside's twitching, adrenaline. You know, I'm going to have to fight people when I get in there. What's it going to be like? Oh, it terrified me. I really was. And when I started on my training course, there was 24 of us, which was quite a big training course. You know, half the people on there, I had no idea. I don't know what they thought they were going into. You know, I've been around a bit, worked on the doors and that in Sheffield, played rugby. I'd had my scraps growing up, got some life experience, travelled. There were people on that really young who just had no idea. So yeah, baptism of fire, I would say quite definitely. In fact, the first time we went into the prison, we're in civilian clothes. All of us, there used to be what they call Main Street. So you had a wing. A lot of wings are built sort of in a flower shape.
Right.
You have a centre, the wings are off shot.
Right.
So when they come off them wings, they come into the centre. And then on your way, there's a walkway called Main Street.
Main Street.
Main Street. It's just the main walkway,
All right.
you know, to get to the workshops, reception, all the things that you deal with. A lad walked straight up to me. We're all stood at the end of it, right in my face. Yeah, wait till you get in here. You know,
As a prisoner.
Oh yeah, straight in my face, nose to nose.
How does that make you feel?
You know, what do you do? How do you react? See, the thing about a prison officer, the difficult thing is you don't know how to react to anything. You don't know what you should be doing. Should I have punched him in the face? I butted him, you know, backed off. I just stood there and looked at him. I didn't know what to say. But when I looked round, there was a crowd of us, obviously. Then everyone was sort of like, you know, pretending that they weren't there sort of thing. So...
Was one of the issues when you got in the gangs in prison? Was that something you didn't imagine would?
Right.
Did you know about?
So in the private sector, there are gangs. Manchester, you know, it's well known. There's gangs in different areas. A couple of gangs in Moffside, Gooch and Doddington, which, again, being a Yorkshire lad, I had no idea. If you've grown up in Manchester or Salford, you'll know about the gangs. You know, I had no idea that areas in the city that the gangs were named after literally street places.
Yeah. I mean, Sean Atwood's told me, you know, in America, maybe it's different. I don't know. He was talking about the Aryan Brotherhood and all of these kinds of things.
Oh, yeah, in prisons. It's not so much like that. I would say you get people who stick together from certain areas. So in the private sector, what prison you end up is usually down to postcodes. So if you were in Bolton, Oldham, Bury, Wigan, you would end up at Forest Bank, yeah? If you got your crime was committed and you went to court in sort of Salford or Manchester, you'd end up at Strangeways. So in Forest Bank, private sector, we had a lot of lads from Bolton. They'd be white lads, a lot of lads from Oldham, you know, from ethnic backgrounds. Wigan lads would be white lads. So they tend to stick together.
Ethnic sort of silos.
Yeah, not so much as that. Now, if I fast forward to now, so this is, you know, I was there in just after the millennium. Now, one of my friends has just come out of there. It is quite definitely ethnic-based gang-type culture. Very, very violent. And, you know, you can just fall foul if you're not in any particular group. You're fair game.
Do you think that's down to the increase in Islamism in the last 10, 20 years?
certainly in dispersal prisons, they're long-term prisons. Yeah, they were built to house Cat A prisoners, high security prisoners. There's been trouble in them prisons for a long, long time. In local prisons and the like, some of that, certainly Forest Bank, people just tend to stick together. Obviously, there's safety in numbers. I can tell you, so chapel, everyone, there's rights and privileges in prison. So you have a right to feel safe, meals, somewhere to sleep, religion. A privilege would be like gym or something similar. So Friday prayers were very different to Sunday mass and the Sunday services. You know, the lads, Muslim lads who were going to that, it was very much high-fiving, quite sort of aggressive towards staff, you know, or very much, you can imagine, can't you, sort of a charged atmosphere. Whereas, if you look at, they would have Christian service on Sunday, Catholic service and the like, very civil, like you'd imagine. You know, people come off the wings, might be chatting, they get in the chapel very quiet. I remember just before I left Forest Bank, doing Friday prayers, and the Imam had no control. Vast majority of lads, to be fair, were in there, down praying. A group at the back, telling jokes, laughing, swearing, you know, no sort of regard for everyone else who was there to pray. So there is an element.
Is there kind of are there issues between, say, the Christians and the Muslims?
Not so much on that front. Again, it's just groups. You know, dispersal prisons. People talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. You know, it is growing. I saw lads. There was a lad at Strangeways about 2005, 2006. I knew him previously from Forest Bank. Was a Salford lad doing a big sentence. So I think at that time he was at Franklin. He'd come back to Strangeways for what they call accumulated visits. So his family, a long way to travel to Franklin, save his visits, because you are obviously entitled, it's a right to family contact. He'd come back to Strangeways with maybe 30 visits, and every day he'd have a visit for a month. And then when the visits were done, he'd go back to Franklin. So first thing I noticed, I'm on the servery, that's where you serve meals to prisoners. He came through, Muslim diet. So I said, Muslim. He just looked at me like, a little bit later on, can I have a word with Miss Samworth? He says, you know what this is about, don't you? I said, I've got a fair idea. He says, look, I'm doing 10 years, me, in Franklin. You're either part of it, the Brotherhood as it were, or it's backs to the wall, or you're in segregation, you're separated. He says, I can't do 10 years backs to the wall or fighting people. So I'm just going along with it.
So they're forced effectively to join the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah. However, I have another very good friend who spent a long time in dispersal prisons. And like he says, a lot of lads who go to these prisons, they're not forced into changing religion to Muslim. They will go along with that. They might have come from broken backgrounds, abuse, you know, as young kids, or they have sort of, there's nobody for them, no family, and they're against sort of the government, they're against the prison service, they're anti-establishment. So you imagine you come from a background, maybe the care system, you land in a dispersal prison, big sentence, these guys go, come to us, we'll welcome you. You've got a family, security.
Protection.
And some safety, yes, some protection. So there is people who will go along with that. It's not all forced. However, the fact that a lot of dispersal prisons like Franklin had units keep separate, so they'd have people who maybe were refusing or were scared, to be kept separate from sort of the rest of the population. Protection. Them units were originally built to sort of house the worst and manage the most dangerous prisoners. However, you know, they ended up housing people who were victims, if you like, for me.
And a lot of these people are supposed to be, I suppose, being de-radicalized, But are they actually just being radicalised? Are people being radicalised in prison?
How do you de-radicalise someone? You see, I would think if you took, I don't know, a dozen people out of the prison system, a lot of therapy, a lot of time, more than you can give people in prison, you might well de-radicalise someone. But I would always be wary. In prison, there's nothing. I always say this, it's, you know, sounds a bit of a sort of piss take, but there's no GCSE in de-radicalisation. Yeah, we've got radical imams in prison, not all, again, but how can that be? How could you possibly have, when you've got an issue within the prison system, especially dispersals, a radical imam going in and preaching to people? You know, the imams come across a few, private sector, public sector. For me, they're quite fearful, I would say. I've met ones who were fearful. They have challenged the narrative. At Strangeways, we had an imam. He had some sort of apprentices under him, if you like. He was the main man. 3 lads under him. One of them was totally focused. He was there for the Muslim guys and nobody else. Now, the chaplains, the sort of faith group, should be there for everyone. So, you know, the Christians or the Catholic priests, they'll see everyone. They'll talk to the Muslim lads, the Catholic lads, anybody and everybody. That one young lad was just there for the Muslims, didn't want to know anybody else. The other 2, quite switched on. They knew what prison was about, and they were there for everyone. But that imam, during Ramadan, he had 3 lads kicked off. 3 of them badly assaulted a lad. They were eating, smoking during Ramadan, collecting food from the servage during the day, insisting, as it is, everyone on Ramadan will get a pack at night. So people observing Ramadan, we'd serve normal meals, and then when people were locked up, we were good ground, and they used to have flasks and pikes, quite a good scran, curries, chapatis, all that sort of thing. They get that food for the night so they could eat during the night. But these lads, you know, they were insisting on going to the survey during the day. Our senior officer challenged that, and the governor said, if they're queuing for food, you've got to give them food. The imam hadn't kicked off. One of them took it to Court of European Rights or something like that, went quite high up and got a big wedge, compo. So from that point on, that imam just, it was just like, you know, I'm not going to challenge anything. There's no point.
So they were some Muslim guys in prison, and they wanted to eat in the day.
They were eating.
Yeah.
They beat somebody up. They were smoking.
What if they want to eat? That's all right, isn't it? Like if they don't want to go obey Ramadan.
But they were observing Ramadan, so
they were getting twice.
If you weren't on Ramadan, you know, these people from ethnic backgrounds who are not Muslims or who choose not to fast during the day, they could take fruit from the servery. But the specific people on Ramadan would get a pack. So it's not you can have that and that. It's either or.
So they were trying to get food twice.
Yeah,
that's mental. What about? I've heard there were hits put out on prison officers. Does that happen?
Okay, again, if you go back to when I started in the prison service, there is a disgusting practice called potting, where prisoners would collect urine and feces and throw it all prison officers. Now, it used to be that you could maybe spot who that was going to happen to. So there was a lad, I had a period of time where I was suspended from work in the private sector. And when I come back, first day I met this lad, beyond obnoxious, horrible, the way he talked to people. And I was talking about him to somebody else. And I said, he'll end up getting potted him. He was just beyond nasty, do you know what I mean? And he did, he got potted. Again, it's disgusting, but you could sometimes see who that might happen to. That changed for me. Same with prison officers. If someone's a bad bully, constantly at it, then they might well get threats. They might get threats on the outside, something like that. that sort of thing. I think now, if you were a really good prison officer, there's a chance that pressure might be put on you. Maybe if you were doing your job really well, as opposed to being a bad bully or somebody who wasn't doing the job, you could come under threat. Now, it happens rarely. However, I can't even imagine. Me, I always spoke and treated people like my nan used to say, I want who spoke to and treat this en, or treated yourself. And that worked really well. You know, you got respect off people. I can't imagine having my family threatened when I was in that job. You know, if I don't know, some security admin and said, look, there's a threat to your family, threat to that address, that's terrifying. But it did happen to people. You know, these people who had bells put in direct to the police, that sort of thing. These prison officers who, you know, it was announced to pretty much everyone where they lived and that, maybe because somebody got a beef with them. There are some people, a small majority in prison, who have the capability, the contacts and that to make life very difficult for people. On the whole, it doesn't happen. But, you know, it is a scary thought, that, for me.
Is that something, were you saying that even if a prison officer does a good job nowadays, is it getting worse?
Yeah, I think it's got worse now.
Why is that?
So if you go pre-COVID, so most prisons had a regime, yeah? You had enough staff to run a regime. Round about 2012, the prison service brought in what they call workforce modernisation and benchmarking. In engineering, we had systems like that. So they'd look at me doing a job. If I was required to produce 60 items an hour, yeah, and I produced 70, I'd get a bonus. But then somebody would come along and say, well, if you can do 70 easily, that's the new target. So in order to get a bonus. But what it meant in the prison service was reducing staff. That's what they did. They didn't actually make anyone redundant because every prison was running short. So it started in 2012 with prisons like Hull, and over 3 years, it worked its way through the system. People would come into your prison doing this benchmarking sort of thing, and you'd end up requiring fewer staff to do the job. So Strangeways, March the 1st, 2015. If we go to February 28th, we were approximately 80 staff short. Yeah. No change in staff, nobody made redundant, nobody employed. March the 1st, 24 hours later, it was alleged we had 16 staff too many. So they'd done away with that. Now, being in prison is not like any other job. If you're in a supermarket, yeah, Wednesday afternoon in summer, you know, one on the butchers, one on pizza, one on clothing, that's fine. When it comes to Christmas, you bring staff in, don't you? Yeah. You have the tills manned and everything else, yeah? Prison is not like a supermarket. If it kicks off, you need more staff. Not at Christmas, not any other time. You need them there. And people deemed that those staff weren't necessary. So there was less people responding to incidents. So if I'm somewhere else doing a job, yeah, and then I'm required back on my wing to serve meals, but there's an incident there, I'm not coming back to my wing. So my wing's short. And it was an absolute car crash from day one. The regime, it just went to pot. They were what you call an Oscar 1, yeah? In uniform, that's principal officer, senior officer, 1 pip on a wing in uniform. He's a manager. The principal officer, 2 pips. They might be overall manager of an area, but they also do the Oscar 1 job and Oscar 2, so that's shift manager. You have a duty governor in a suit. They manage the prison. Any incidents that Oscar 1 would manage. So Strangeways, Oscar 1 in the morning, and this was common, 30 staff short. That start at shift, 30 staff short. Where do you start? You start locking wings down. Yeah. Now, if you're expecting to be out 2 hours and exercise, nobody's come, nobody's unlocked you, then frustrations boil over, and it just became more and more violent. However, in prison, there's VP prisoners, right? Vulnerable prisoners, pedophiles, sex offenders, yeah. They're kept separate from everyone else because when they come into prison, they pick on the vulnerable. They're seen as vulnerable.
I see, yeah. Well, everyone wants to kill them.
So, yeah, exactly. So there's two regimes. There's normal prisoner movement and there's VP movement. So if we're sending people to work, and they'd be in separate workshops, obviously, they might move VPs first and then they move normal location prisoners. Very rare you found a sex offender on a normal wing. You get the odd lad, they'd blag it right up until the point they were going to be in court and it was going to be in the Manchester Evening News. Mr. Samworth, can I have a word? Boom, they're on a VP wing. However, now I'm reliably informed they're everywhere. These people are everywhere. And if we look at dispersal prisons, some quite just evil people. Remember Sarah Sharif, the little girl, pretty little girl, father and mother, loosely speaking, she ended up dead. So her dad has killed his daughter. He's gone to dispersal prison. He's protected. He's a Muslim. You're in our gang now. You've got protection. Now, that protection might come at a price. It might be that he's extorted. His family have to pay, maybe some money on the out or something like that. Or at some point, he might be required to may assault an officer or something. But as it is, there's no VPs, us and them. Everyone wants to kill them. They're all welcome into the sort of brotherhood, as it were.
Bloody hell. That's mad. That's mad because my understanding of prison, which is very limited, but it was always like those guys go into prison having committed a crime like that, they're just killed or something horrible happens to them. I remember I read a book of a fellow who was in prison and he said part of it, in addition to just the disgust at what those guys have done to children often, is that a prisoner feels like they're very low status. So when some people come into the prison who are even lower status than them, it's a feeling of like almost euphoria, like we're above them and I get to do what I want to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, what you're telling me though is that now with the Muslim grooming gangs, I imagine, right? What happens then? They go into prison.
Well, again, as my time was coming to an end at Strangeways, the VP wings. Firstly, I used to work on them on overtime. If you're doing overtime, you don't get to pick and choose where you go. So if I was on a VP wing, there may be some staff on there, or occasionally there'd be lads who weren't VPs, they weren't sex offenders. However, I remember one lad, he'd come into the prison, well known on the out. He was at risk in that prison. There was no wing he could go because who he was, areas from, who he was connected to.
What, just a famous person or something?
Infamous.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, maybe somebody from a different gang. There's none of his mates in that prison or whatever. So we used to have what you call own protection prisoners. So he would sign a compact and he would be on a VP wing, not a sex offender.
But you had to be with all the other sex offenders who were sex offenders.
Correct. So obviously that, for me, they hated that. They just keep their heads down. So if I was working on a VP wing, there was no staff to chat to. There might be the odd lad I knew, been around the jail. I'd go and chat to them. However, I absolutely had no time for the majority of them. It's a very dark place because these people, they're with like-minded people, they're networking, they're all...
Oh, shit.
Yeah, exactly. You can imagine, can't you?
Yeah.
So, again, if you want to take that to dispersal prisons now, you imagine the grooming gang sort of scandal. You've got possibly massive networking. It don't bear thinking about. Now, a lot of them, they would talk to the wing staff, but maybe not talk to me if they didn't know me, which I was happy with. I don't want to engage with people like that. Mm. Some, there's no shame. They don't see any shame in what they've done.
Really?
Yeah. They were the worst sort, maybe arrogant, full of themselves.
I don't know why, but I guess I'm imagining a lot of them as like, oh God, what have I done? I'm a monster. I'm a terrible person. I'll keep my head down. But you're saying, so the ones you've met, and I try not to say the P word too often on YouTube. That's the only reason I'm
I know.
Yeah, that's why we're flirting around.
I just say, yeah, people who harm children or whatever, people know what we're talking about.
It's actually disgusting that YouTube makes us do that, but that's another point. But yeah, I mean, so you met these people. I mean, because of your job, you had to be. How did that feel to have to work around them?
Well, at the time, I didn't think about it. One of my mates, I called him Nobby Nobbler in my first book because he was an ex-squaddy, very private person, but he quite definitely, he was a very good friend. We didn't socialise on the out, but I trust him. He trusted me. We had a laugh, made light of things. He refused on overtime to work on a wing like that. He'd have nothing to do with it at all. And now I understand that. At the time, I'd just go and do a shift, not think about it. Now, my tolerance, now I have no tolerance for people who harm children, none whatsoever. It's just sickening.
But I suppose wouldn't you feel like, yeah, but someone's got to do it, and I don't want my mates to have to do it more, so I'll go and do that shift from time to time.
Well, here's the thing. Some people liked working in that environment, not because they were sick or depraved, but quite often there'd be no trouble on there. You got people together, they're kept away from the rest of the prison, they're with like-minded people, so it might well be a very quiet place to work, an easy place to work. People weren't kicking off. They weren't disruptive or anything like that. They'd just go along with the regime.
But you have to work with these very creepy people. That's the trade-off.
Yeah, some people who worked on there had very little contact, wouldn't talk. Some, they'd just get on with it or whatever.
Yeah.
Difficult.
I think I'd be better suited to that because I wouldn't last a minute. Do you know what I mean? What am I going to do in the other part where if there's fights and things?
Well, you don't know, Andrew, right? I met some people. I worked with some people who should not have been prison officers. And they sound very conflicting, this, but they were good staff. They were, maybe never had a fight in their life, maybe got no bottle. When push comes to shove, lying in the sand, adrenaline's pumping, fight or flight or freeze, they might well be ready for off or freeze. However, they might de-escalate something. So I'm toe-to-toe with you. Yeah, I'm toe-to-toe. I've tried everything. You're not for coming down. So, maybe they might be on my shoulder here. Why are you being like that, Miss Samworth? Miss Samworth's all right, sort of this, sort of that sort of thing. However, again, they wouldn't lead you into battle if there was going to be an incident, but they would follow you. There were people, lads and lasses, not a presence like mine. I was probably 6 foot, obviously the bald head, classic prison officer, 18 stone, 19 stone. They were lightweight, what I'd call jockey weight, but they didn't have a presence that they would get stuck in, and they get hurt as well. Because the difference is pretty much everyone who's been in prison, all the lads in prison, they come from tough backgrounds, tough upbringing. They've had fights, they've been in conflict, so they're used to that. The more fights you have, the better you are. It's like rugby. When I played rugby, adrenaline used to make me sick. However, it also gives you an edge. So the lads that we used to conflict, a lot of staff never had a fight in their life. They've never been in conflict in their life. So, yeah.
What about prisoners? Because I read this book. It was Chris Atkins. It's called A Bit of a Stretch.
Yeah.
And
I know the guy.
Oh, right. So he's sort of, I suppose he's as close as it gets to kind of me. I'm trying to imagine myself.
Yeah, a journo inside.
Yeah,
you're going to see it different.
Yeah, and he was middle class as well, and he was never getting in fights and stuff. But he sort of seemed to handle himself quite well because he made himself useful, I think, to everybody.
Yeah, definitely. That is a thing, and it's also how you present yourself. The best advice for anyone going into prison, that's either side of the door, is be humble and try and be yourself. Try not to be something you're not, because you'll get found out. So there is people, lads I saw in prison, nothing about them, maybe white collar workers, they would get on and they'd have friends and they'd be comfortable and they wouldn't be under threat because, like you said, they might have a talent. Maybe they could write. They were very good at English. A lot of lads in prison, poorly educated, can't write. So they were lads you'd go to and say, will you help this lad write a letter to his missus? That's a massive thing, that. Firstly, there's a trust, tell the missus I love her, all that sort of thing. But yeah, it's... A lot of it depends how you are. There's some people who are obnoxious. Some are anti-establishment, don't like staff. Don't necessarily mean they're going to be assaulting you. They'll just keep out of your way. Vast majority of people, and again, this is an important thing to know, in normal prison-type environments, just get on with the jail. Get the sentence, get their head down. Gangsters, crime family-type people and that come into prison, get a job as a cleaner, so they're cleaning on the wing, get their heads down, they get some gym, extra gym, and away you go.
Yeah, just get through it.
Vast majority are like that. There's just a percentage that very, very dangerous, and staff are always going to be a risk.
One of the issues recently that a lot of people are talking about is Tommy Robinson.
Yep.
He was in prison.
Yep.
He's warned for years about Islamism. There's too many Muslims in the country, or extremist Muslims, let's say. And now it seems like because of that, because of the so many Muslims, especially in our prisons, he had to be in solitary confinement.
Right.
What do you make of that?
So I'll tell you first from the prison service point of view. Yeah. So I'm the governor at Woodhill. So I've got Tommy Robinson. Yeah.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically. I would be a good governor, but I never reached them levels. I had no ambitions to be promoted. Just a landing screw, as they say, working residential. Anyway, he's coming, Tommy Robinson, into my prison. Someone's made a threat towards him. Now, normally, if a prisoner's threatened by somebody, you're not going to isolate that prisoner, put him in solitary confinement or segregation. Yeah, the person who's made the threat is segregated, or you transfer him out of the prison. So, like I say, I'm Woodhill, Governor, Tommy Robinson's here. He is at risk. I doubt very much there's many people in prison, Muslims, particularly, who don't know who Tommy Robinson is. So, in order to keep him safe, I'm going to segregate him. Now, he can appeal against being segregated. He was never going to win that appeal. The safest place for him, for me, is segregated. Yeah? Now, maybe some overreach of the establishment, some pressure on the governor. Maybe the governor, had no liking of Tommy Robinson. I don't know. He's like Marmite, isn't he? You either love him or hate him. However, he was quite definitely going to be safe. Now, the other restrictions is an overreach. People visiting him, signing their life away. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to post on social media. All his calls being monitored. That is overkill. That is sort of category A type procedures. Do you know what I mean?
As if he was a murderer or something.
Yeah. As though he was the highest risk to the public.
Yeah.
So, but he was never going to be able to win an appeal, like I say, because it's about keeping him safe, and he quite definitely would be safe. I would love to know, the staff's reaction to him. Yeah.
Have you heard anything coming out of that?
No, not really. Like I say, I'd love to ask him about his prison time. Here's the thing. Once you're segregated or in solitary confinement, if you're in a segregation unit, you would get visited by the duty governor every day. The duty governor, prison health cares, prison segs, visits everyone every day. You are reviewed regular, mental health, isolation. Might well be some mental health input. The chaplains would usually visit prison health cares and segregated prisons, again, because you're isolated from everyone else. There's procedures in place to make sure that people are safeguarded, really. I would like to know whether all those procedures, were reviewed.
I've got him coming on soon. So yeah, what would you like? What shall I ask him? That.
Yeah, about how the staff were. Did they speak to him? Were they abrupt? You see, if say there was a manager over that area, I used to treat people how I find them. You give people every opportunity. I can't see him having been a problem in segregation. You know, whether staff had chat with him or maybe they were told not to get close, not to chat. Maybe the governor said, you know, you just give him what he's entitled to and nothing else. That sort of thing.
People tend to like him. If you go outside of politically and his enemies and those kinds of things, he's very sort of happy-go-lucky, and he's sort of
right. Listen, I'll tell you what I think about Tommy Robins, because loads of people have asked me. Right, he speaks a lot of truth. The thing about him though is his address at Oxford Union, was it 2014? He is educated, if you like, on his chosen subject. He knows what he's talking about. I've seen him debate people on TV, you know, Muslim hate preachers or whatever on the streets. It's just that the things he talk about are dark. A lot of people want to shut off. They don't want to believe that there's grooming gangs or anything like that. Obviously, people chuck the race card everywhere, you know, just to shut down conversation. You're a racist, this sort of thing. He's an educated lad. I'm quite sure he knew he was going to prison.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to know how he prepared himself for that. What sort of legal advice he took. How he's going to safeguard himself from not going back to prison. Because when you leave prison, you have a license. So, for instance, if you've been involved in firearms, your license, obviously you can't be near firearms or anything, it would also include fireworks. They come under.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, firearms, you can't have fireworks or be in possession. So I would think, look at the restrictions on him in prison, the list of restrictions when he come out, post on social media, what he can and can't say. I think that there will be there'll be like a toilet roll if we, you know, rolled it out.
Interesting. Yeah, he's got to stop with the contempt of court stuff. I mean, it's a really hard one because he went to prison, didn't he? Because he released this video that claimed that the kid, who a lot of people say was bullied, was the bully.
Yeah.
None of us know the truth there.
No, we don't.
Except, you know, that he was told, stop it.
Yeah.
And then he put it out anyway. So I think you're right. He knew he was going to prison.
But definitely ask him about that, how he was treated.
Yeah.
You know, did he see, did the chaplains or imams or anyone come see him?
That would be interesting.
Was he visited by well, again, if you're the duty imam, or not the duty imam necessarily, but within the church, you've got all the denominations, you know, Muslim, you've got Church of England, Anglican, Catholic. There was some obscure ones. You've got Buddhists and things like that. One of those people every day would be the duty person, and they will be the one who go to the segregation. So it might be the Buddhist guy or lass. They go to segregation, they go to the healthcare, they visit everyone. It'd be interesting to know if when the imam was on duty, whether they visited him, that sort of thing.
If I'm an imam, I would be going straight to Tommy Robinson to have a chat.
Yeah, me too. You know, there's things I'd like to ask him, like I say, how he was treated by staff. You know, whether it was civil. On the food front, so you always hear things, right? So you can have canteen. When you're in prison, a sentenced prisoner, you have an amount of money you can spend on prison canteen. Buy coffee, tea, shower gels, this sort of thing. I'd like to know whether he was eating his own food and he kept away from prison food, because I would imagine he would be fearful that his food might be contaminated. Yeah.
Because is that often prepared by other prisoners?
Right. So again, if we go to both kitchens, private sector when I worked there and public sector, firstly, you could eat off the floor in both them kitchens. Prison kitchens and the serveries on every wing where you serve meals are subject to hygiene rating. You know, like you go to your takeaway, 4 out of 5. At Strangeways, every year, kitchen 5, every servery 5. So hygiene's immaculate. The VP food will be transferred from a kitchen in a trolley. They're like a big flask, as would normal wings food. So in the kitchen at Strangeways, whoever was in charge, head chef, the prisoners who were loading the trolleys wouldn't know which was going to the VP wing and which was going to the lifers wing.
Deliberately.
The prison healthcare and the segregation would have smaller trolleys. The segregation probably held at max 30 prisoners. The healthcare maybe 25. So they'd be a smaller trolley. Maybe the staff would load them themselves. So there's no contamination, because if you're a kitchen worker and you start messing about with people's food, that there's a couple of things you don't mess about with, and one of them is food. However, if I'm in Tommy Robinson's place, I don't think I'm eating the prison food, to be honest. I would be worried about it being contaminated, maybe.
Did you see sort of hits taken out on people? I'm trying to imagine if he had been in the general prison population, what's the kind of thing that could have happened to him?
Okay, so there's all manner of weapons in prison. If you look at, El Salvador, Strangeways, anywhere they have the same weapons, fabricated from razor blades, shanks made of anything, plastic, bitter metal. They're all dangerous, stabby, pointy weapons. For me, the thing I was always scared of, hot water and sugar, liquid napalm, they call it, in your face.
So that fella, Axel Rudakubana,
yeah, he did, yeah,
Southport killer. He just, people were going, why has he got a kettle?
Right. I will tell you now. So if he's segregated or on the prison healthcare, you have observation panels. There's a lot of naive, young, maybe old as well, inexperienced staff. For me, knowing him, every time I go to his cell, if I'm going to drop that hatch and look in, there's a flap you can move, glass. I'm having a look. He's got a cup in his hand, put the cup down. Back of the cell or something like that before I drop it.
Because that'll disfigure you, won't it?
Especially, it's horrendous. The thought of that is horrendous. He's got a kettle because, again, you have to understand this, there'll be people within the system, there always is, who human rights. Everyone else has got a kettle. He's entitled to a kettle. You're entitled to hot water as a prisoner with your meal. I'm not quite sure of the PSOs, prison service orders, prison service instructions, but with your meal, you're entitled to a hot drink twice a day, maybe 3 times a day. Kettles are easier if wings are locked down. We used to have boilers on the landings at Strangeways. If people are locked down 23 hours a day, it's difficult then to get hot water to them. So if you've got a kettle in a cell, again, more than 99% of prisoners, it's not a problem. They're not going to risk assaulting an officer like that for no good reason unless they're in debt. There's a lot of people who get in debt who will commit assaults. You owe me £300, yeah? I don't like that, officer. I'm going to harm one of your family members on the out, or you are going to dash that officer with liquid napalm.
Oh, man.
What are you going to do? So that is a danger now as well.
Shit. Yeah. So then you never know who to expect it from.
No. But if we look at him, I don't even want to say his name, the guy from Southport, horrendous. He's already twice assaulted people. He's doing 50-odd years. He's got nothing to lose. Yeah. He's not in 2 years' time suddenly going to think, I'm a reformed lad now. He's got nothing to lose, that lad. He's always going to be a risk. So I'm building a Supermax. It's going to be a very limited regime, and I'm going to pluck everyone in the prison system who is a risk to staff. That's people with extreme views, people of terror, maybe people whole of life. Damien Bendel, do you know who he is? So he was at Franklin. He committed, again, an horrendous crime. He killed his so-called partner who was pregnant, her 2 children, and a young child who was stopping with her family kids. He's a monster. He got whole of life. He's never getting out. Franklin, 18 months. He's in a workshop with a hammer. He's assaulted someone. So they've set a trial date for that lad. That lad is in my Supermax now. He's on 23-hour bang-up and he's getting nothing else. Forget his human rights. Forget everything else. It's about keeping people safe.
Yeah.
You see where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah.
And there's people all over the system. Prison officers in each prison will know. It might not be a massive amount of people, but they're warehoused. They're going to my Supermax. There's no mobile phones. We've got blockers, so they're not using mobile phones. I'll have 2 regimes, small units. If you come into prison, initially, I'm going to put you on a reception unit, see how you behave. If you want to hurt my staff, You're on 23-hour bang up forever. I don't care. If you behave, I'm going to put you on a unit where you've got a little gym, maybe a little kitchen. However, me and my staff are not on that unit. We're not at risk. We're not going to get dashed with hot water. We're not going to get stabbed. If it kicks off on that unit, so that's prisoner on prisoner, we're not coming in till there's enough of us, or you've all gone behind your doors, electronically locked. They need something like that. It needs to be secure, communication-wise and everything else. You have a right to religion. So guess what? If you're on a unit and you're all Muslims, there's a screen, Imam, somewhere else, there you go, you can have Friday prayers.
Yeah.
So you give them all the rights. However, staff, civilian staff, everyone is protected. They're removed off them landings.
But there were failures, weren't there, with that Southport killer?
Absolutely. But again, everywhere's short-staffed. I tell you what, as a prison officer, and every prison officer has always done this, you make it work. You're short-staffed, you make it work.
How is it that what a lot of people are talking at the moment about Lucy Connolly? You know, she's gone to prison for 31 months for a stupid, horrible tweet she did.
Yep.
And then the people we were talking about before who are violent to children, they seem to be getting 1 or 2 years.
Right. Or not going to prison. These people, obviously, to my channel, send me emails all the time, articles, Bradford, Leeds, local areas to me, people going to court. I can't remember the guy's name, 36-year-old family man. Yeah. He's third world culture, violence, religion. You know where I'm coming from with that? Mm. He has taken repeatedly a 13-year-old girl, subjected her to the worst ordeals. He's in court, and the judges said, what an upstanding man. He works, he's got a family.
Oh.
He works, he's got a family, 2 years probation, not even seen the inside of a prison. And this is happening regular. It's happening regularly. Anyone who commits any sexual offence is in prison. And they want to be the harshest sentences.
You're saying they should be. Anyone who should be in prison.
I don't really saw recently in London. They've got some guy who's attacked 3 young lasses at night on the tubes. He's basically been travelling, looking for lonely females, and I don't know the extent, but flashing, sexual assault or whatever. Yeah, he's got something like 18 months probation. I'll tell you now, that lad, sometime in the future, will go full on, and possibly if he's allowed to get away with that, he'll kill someone. That's how they start, flashing, and it progresses. Anyone who commits a sexual offence, they're locked up and they're given the most stringent sentences.
They should be.
Yeah. There's a lot of them not even seeing the inside of prison cells.
This pisses people off so much. It doesn't seem to be a vote winner for anyone. The only reason I can think of, and tell me if this might be it, is it's just that there are so many people out there doing sexual horrible things that the prison, there was just, if they did, there'd be no space.
Okay. The government's early release scheme, 1/3 of the way through sentences, yeah. I'll tell you right now, a rough guess, I'll say there's probably 10,000 prisoners with less than a year to serve. I'm talking some less than a year being, they're out first. Anyone who's low risk, you can let them out for me and tag them. No risk to the public, you let them out. They're looking at people who might have served 4 years, got a 12 for, again, assault on a child or a woman. Wrong, just wrong.
They're letting them out instead of someone like Lucy.
You let low risk.
Yeah.
You know.
Lucy Connolly.
Right, Lucy Connolly. Let me tell you about that. That one, I'm glad people are getting, people can say people are grandstanding. Richard Tice just been seer. Lucy Connolly, firstly, all them people from Southport, I want to know what they were subjected to in 5 days, 7-day courts, all going guilty, or getting locked up on the harsh side of prison sentences. Yeah. What, have they been threatened? You're looking at 10 years. In prison, riot or mutiny, as it's called, if you get convicted of that, you can get an extra 10 years. So have they said, I'm going to class it as riot, you're looking at 10 years. So you go guilty. What have they said to people?
It's mad.
Because the Royal Marine, who said, no, I'm going to run a trial, got a barrister, he got off. You know, they didn't even have a charge against him. If he'd have gone guilty, he'd have possibly been serving 2 or 3 years. You know, he got a bit of ball, said, no, I'm not going along with that. And he's walked away scot-free. Lucy Connolly, there's an overreach there, quite definitely. That lass is zero risk to public. She could be on HDC, that's home detention curfew. So she's at home now, serving the rest of her sentence with a tag. You can keep her 24 hours a day. Yeah?
Yeah.
No problem. She's got a daughter who's not doing well and a husband who's ill. No risk. She could be on ROTL, release on temporary license. Yeah? Her probation officer, she should be first on list. Should be out. No questions. It's an when she gets out, again, I'd love to just speak to her, ask how she was treated. Speak to her probation officer. Her probation officer might have no say in the matter. Somebody up here said no. She's not getting nothing. She's serving a full term or whatever. There is an overreach and it's a disgrace. It really is.
It's just the maddest. It's the maddest thing. Like, everybody agrees it was a horrible post. But, I've got family members
do you know what? Everyone says that. It's like a disclaimer. Yeah. Look at the sentiment. People okay, Ricky Jones. You don't know who he is. He's a Labour, or was a Labour councillor.
Oh, the Zionist
yes,
throats.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Giving it this one. That is incitement.
But they haven't done his sentencing yet, have they?
No, it was around about August. You know, they've put it off. Yeah? This gesture with those words, that is incitement right there. His feet should not have touched the floor. He's wandering about.
Yeah.
Yeah?
See, I sort of feel I wouldn't want either of them, even though I disagree with. Is it Ricky Jones' name?
Yeah, I think it is Ricky Jones.
Something like that, that Labour fella.
Yeah,
I don't like the idea of anyone going to prison, of being, they're taken away because of stuff they've said on a sort of on the cuff moment. What he said was, you're right though, 1,000 times worse.
Correct. I'm just now using the standards that the government have put in place.
Yeah.
You know, I heard something the other day. Nice. I don't know whether it was a head of the Manchester Police. He's on about these non-hate crimes. Yeah. He said we need to do away with it. It needs to stop. You know, it's a waste of police time. 6 coppers turning up somewhere. Vanessa, was she called Vanessa Brown? Have you heard of her?
There's too many incidents, aren't there?
Sorry, there is, but I remember them all because it's injustice. So she's a mum, 50 odd. She's at her mother's. Her kids are there. Police turn up. She's arrested, questioned for 8 hours. The crime? She took her iPad off her kids to get them to do the homework. Yeah. Why is anyone even interested or responding to that?
Well, there's Maxie Allen as well. Do you remember that one? That was he was arguing with people in the school WhatsApp group.
Oh yeah,
police. They were put in a jail for like a day.
It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. How about solving some real crime? Get back on streets. You know.
Oh man,
infuriating. Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah. What would you say? What's sort of the worst thing you saw in your time on the wards?
Top 10. It's very difficult to, it's maybe how things affected me and not other people, certain events. I would say people who were mentally unwell should never gone to prison. Okay, we had a young lad. So when I first started at Strangeways on K wing, biggest wing in the jail, 200 remand prisoners. At night, you'd have 6 staff, 2 on each of 3 landings, 200 prisoners, like a zoo. Madness, noisy, crazy, atmosphere, terrifying and amusing in equal amounts. It was like a bit of a rush. A young lad on there, so the 2's landing, which was the bottom landing, we had basic regime prisoners, they're prisoners on punishment, restricted regime, and we used to have the cleaners, so they're trusted lads, we'd give them a job to clean, and we used to have lads who were known to be mentally unwell. Yeah, whatever description you want to put on that. There was a young lad on there, always coped, won't get bullied. You see, prisoners used to have sort of a moral code. Everyone knew who he was. He was in and out of prison. He weren't well. He wouldn't get bullied. His stuff wouldn't get taken off him. Cleaners would look after him. you know, Smithy, make sure nobody, they would do that. He ended up on the healthcare towards the end of my career, not taking his medication. Now, the sad thing with people who are seriously mentally unwell on medication is if they feel they're in a good place or they're doing well, they feel they don't need the meds, so he stopped taking his meds. Space of about 7 days, he just deteriorated. He was very young and innocent looking. His crimes were nothing. Should never been to prison. And on his last day before he went on an emergency section, stood talking to him, trying to get him to give himself a wash and put clean clothes on, covered in his own excrement, we give something to eat, a sandwich pack, and he's basically putting excrement on his sandwiches and eating it. You know, now that, you know, people might think I'd talk about, you know, deaths in custody, the worst self-harming, that, seeing a lad like that. And the psychiatrist said that when he come to see him. He looked, he says, why am I even here? Why is he not in hospital? You know, what part about eating your own shit is ever going to be right? You know, and you just, in a moment, you see him, you're talking to him, trying to get him to change his clothes and that. And it's just, it's wrong and it's sad. Self-harming, you know, some pretty horrific incidents. I would say growing up, I'm not easily shocked me, you know, seeing quite a lot of things, seeing my own mother in chapel arrest. She was only 38, you know, nothing is ever going to be as bad as that. However, the things some people did to themselves in prison, and with self-harming, right, so misconception, or not a misconception, it's partly right. A lot of people said or say it's for manipulation, yeah. Vast majority in prison, manipulation. If you don't do this or get me off this wing, I'm going to do this. However, there is a small percent who, again, maybe come from abuse as kids, who, and it's not always visible. Yeah, they were, again, on K-Wing when I was there was a lad come to me, Mr. Samworth, could you get me a nurse? I said, have you cut yourself? He was known. People had seen him as Myversome. He just said, could you get me a nurse? So I got a nurse, went to his cell, all the way down, opened it up. There's no consequence. That lad, you know, it wasn't after attention, it's relief. Yeah, it's relief for whatever reason, and that might be okay for a month or whatever. He was covered. But you never saw them scars. You never saw him, you know. Again, people would see him as Myversome and troublesome. If he was walking towards them, holding his arm, they'd walk off or turn their backs or whatever. And there was a lot of people like that. Again, quite shocking.
That was the most difficult part for you, would you say?
The mental health side of it, some quite high profile evil prisoners. You know, they've killed kids or done whatever, and they played a mental health card. A lot of people do it. I'm sure, as a kid, did you ever do that? So you've done something wrong, you're going to be in trouble, so you might tell a little white lie. Mm-hmm. Yeah. However, to see grown men who have, you know, maybe abused, taken children, done whatever, then try and pretend to be mad is sickening, to say the least. Again, imagine a motorway, there's an accident the other side, not on your side, you're in traffic because everyone's rubbernecking, having a look. Prison staff, you know, coming onto a unit, maybe a death in custody, having a look in a cell. You know, no need to be there. The last death in custody I dealt with was like that. In the private sector, there's a death in custody on a wing. That wing's locked down. There's an officer at the end of the wing with a pad. Who are you? What are you coming on for? No. If they're not sure. So, you know, you might have governors on there. You might have a doctor. That wing is locked down. The healthcare where I worked, there was a string of people coming on. All we needed was the gold poles with the red rope. Yeah, come and have a look. I'll sell tickets. Sickening, to say the least. You know, that sort of Now, that incident was bad enough. That lad, it was horrific dealing with him. But then to see people coming on, you know, no disregard for staff, people on there just having a brew, laughing and joking. In that incident, it was a young lad, young officer. He was ex-military. He was in shock. He was white. Somebody took him under their wing and took him home. And then you get senior officers, people who've been in the job a long time. What's up with that, Toss? You know, needs to grow a set or whatever. It's only a con, that sort of thing. So for me, the incident's bad enough, but then to see and hear these things, anger.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It dehumanizes the whole
Yeah.
situation.
Exactly.
I could talk to you for hours, but I got to ask you, where can people find your channel and those things?
So it's Real Porridge Podcast with Sam Samworth, obviously on YouTube. Just a lot of the stuff I talk about is criminal justice system, but I like, you know, injustices, Lucy Connolly and the like. And I'm out there with my dog Brian.
Oh, lovely.
You know, he makes people smile, golden retriever. It's probably an outlet for me, really. Put stuff out there.
You've got books as well, don't you?
So my first book, both available on Amazon, is Strangeways, A Prison Officer's Story by Neil Samworth. That was my given name at birth. And Strangeways Unlocked. So the first book, Sunday Times top 10 bestseller, done really well. The second book is a look behind the doors, people I used to lock up and then became friends with.
We'll put some links down below. Who
Very
is
kind.
a heretic you admire?
Okay, a couple of homegrown and a couple of not homegrown. So I would say Ricky Gervais, Oscar-type speech. Come and get your Oscar, do one. Don't preach to us.
The Golden Globes, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Katie Hopkins, again, Marmite says it exactly as it is. You know, you're fat, you're not healthy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And she's lost everything, that lass, and she's still going at it.
Yeah. She went at me as well.
Did she?
Yeah. Because I said to her, when she told me about how cancelled she was, I just said, "Oh, did that make you sad?" And I think she thought I was taking the piss. I wasn't.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And then if I'm going to look celebrity stars, I would say Denzel Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, speaking about racism, basically saying, just stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Everything ain't about race. You know, if you're from an ethnic background and you're a crap actor, you're a crap actor. It's nothing to do with race. So
They're both great on that. I've heard them talk on that.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So for me, it's people like that.
Brilliant. Well, people, please go Sam Samworth. You might sometimes Neil Samworth, isn't it? Your Sam
Samworth YouTube channel.
Sam Samworth YouTube channel.
Real Porridge.
Real Porridge. You're going to find it. We'll put the link down below. Please go follow because he's been a brilliant guest and he's got a great channel and some great books that we'll have down below as well. Hit this like button, subscribe to the channel, and keep on watching.